Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini was born on May 17, 1900, in the town of Qom, Iran. His first name, Ruhollah, means Spirit of God. He came from a family with deep roots in religious scholarship. His father, Mustafa Musavi, was a Muslim cleric, and his grandfather, Ahmed Hindi, had also been a respected religious scholar who originally came from India. Ruhollah was the third child in his family, following his two older brothers. When he was just 3 years old, tragedy struck. His father was killed during a conflict over unfair land laws in Iran. After this, Ruhollah and his siblings were raised by their mother, Aga Khanum, and an aunt named Sahabeth. Khomeini grew up in a country with a rich and long history. Iran, known as Persia for much of its past, had been an important center of civilization for thousands of years. Although Iran had avoided being colonized by European powers, the country faced challenges as it tried to modernize in the early 20th century. This period of change shaped Khomeini's upbringing and influenced his future path. From a young age, he began studying religious texts, including the Quran and poetry that celebrated Iranian culture. These early studies set the foundation for his later career as a religious scholar and leader. The region we know as Iran today has a history that spans thousands of years. Historically known as Persia, it was home to one of the world's oldest civilizations. By the 6th century before Christ, the Persian Empire became the largest empire in the world, stretching from the Aegean Sea to what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan. During the Roman era, the Parthian Empire, based in Persia and Mesopotamia, was one of Rome's main rivals. In medieval times, Persia became a significant part of the Muslim Caliphate. After the Mongol invasions, native dynasties like the Safavids emerged, creating an empire that resisted the expansion of the Ottoman Empire. However, in the 19th century, Persia lost large territories in the Caucasus and Central Asia to the Russian Empire. Despite this, Persia remained independent under the Qajar dynasty, unlike many other nations in Asia and Africa that became colonies of European powers. By the early 20th century, Persia, like other independent nations such as Japan and Siam, began modernizing to compete with Western powers. Nasser al-Din Shah Qajar, who ruled from 1848 to 1896, introduced reforms to modernize the country. This process of modernization intensified as oil reserves were discovered in the early 1900s. However, Western influence grew with the Anglo-Persian Agreement of 1919, which many saw as turning Persia into a British puppet state. In 1921, Reza Shah Pahlavi staged a coup and began a series of reforms that shaped modern Iran. These historical changes created the backdrop for the events that influenced Ayatollah Khomeini's rise to prominence. In 1925, Reza Shah Pahlavi officially replaced the Qajar dynasty and began modernizing Iran. His reforms aimed to reshape the country along Western lines, focusing on infrastructure, education, and governance. The changes included creating a centralized government, building railroads, and establishing a modern judicial system. He also encouraged secularism and reduced the influence of Islamic clerics. However, these reforms caused discontent among traditional and religious groups, as they were seen as eroding Islamic values and cultural traditions. The reforms continued under Reza Shah's son, Mohammad Reza Shah, who took power during World War II after his father's abdication in 1941. The younger Shah implemented the White Revolution in the 1960s, which introduced land reforms, improved education, and sought to modernize Iran's economy. The White Revolution caused even greater resistance among the Islamic clergy, including Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini criticized the Shah's secular policies and growing ties with Western nations, particularly the United States. He believed that these changes were undermining Iran's Islamic identity and empowering foreign powers at the expense of Iranians. In 1963, Khomeini's opposition became public. He delivered speeches denouncing the Shah's regime and its reforms. This led to his arrest and house arrest for over 2 months. Khomeini's defiance and growing popularity marked the beginning of his leadership in the resistance against the Shah, setting the stage for the Iranian Revolution. Ayatollah Khomeini's outspoken opposition to the Shah's regime led to his arrest in 1963 and again in 1964. Following his second arrest, the Shah's government, through its secret police, decided to exile Khomeini. On November 4, 1964, Khomeini was sent to Turkey. This marked the beginning of over 14 years in exile. Khomeini spent a short time in Turkey before relocating to Najaf, Iraq, in 1965. Najaf, a city with deep significance for Shia Muslims, provided an ideal setting for Khomeini to continue his scholarly work and build his ideological framework. During his years in Najaf, he taught at the seminary, composed key religious texts, and developed his vision for an Islamic government. His writings argued for the establishment of a theocratic state led by Islamic scholars. In 1970, Khomeini published his most influential work, Islamic Government, where he outlined his concept of Vilayat Faqih, or the rule of the Islamic jurist. This book became a cornerstone of his political ideology and inspired his followers. Despite being in exile, Khomeini maintained communication with his supporters in Iran, often through smuggled messages and writings. In 1978, political unrest in Iran intensified, and the Shah's government negotiated with Iraq to expel Khomeini. By September of that year, Khomeini moved to France, settling in the suburb of Neufel-le-Château. From there, he utilized international media to spread his messages, gaining widespread support within Iran. Khomeini's years in exile were pivotal in shaping his leadership, ideology, and the movement that would ultimately lead to the Iranian Revolution. The Iranian Revolution was fueled by a combination of political, social, and economic factors that created widespread dissatisfaction with the Shah's regime. By the 1970s, many Iranians were discontent with the government's corruption, authoritarian rule, and close ties to Western powers, especially the United States. The Shah's efforts to modernize the country through the White Revolution had alienated traditional and religious groups, while economic inequalities and repression led to growing unrest among the population. In 1977, tensions began to surface more openly. The death of Khomeini's son, Mustafa, in Najaf, which many believe to be orchestrated by the Shah's secret police, fueled anger and resistance. Public protests started in January 1978, escalating after a government-controlled newspaper published an article criticizing Khomeini. This article provoked demonstrations, which were met with brutal crackdowns by the Shah's forces. A turning point came in August 1978 with the Cinema Rex fire in Abadan, which killed nearly 500 people. Although it was likely caused by extremists, the public blamed the Shah's regime, intensifying protests. In September, the government declared martial law, and the Jala Square massacre on September 8th, also known as Black Friday, resulted in hundreds of deaths. These events further radicalized the movement against the Shah. Throughout this period, Khomeini, who was in exile in France, used international media to galvanize support for the revolution. His messages called for the overthrow of the Shah and the establishment of an Islamic government. By December 1978, nationwide strikes and protests paralyzed the country, and it became clear that the Shah's rule was collapsing. On January 16, 1979, the Shah fled Iran, and 2 weeks later, Khomeini returned to a hero's welcome. His arrival marked the culmination of the revolution, although the struggle to define Iran's new government had just begun. Following the Shah's departure from Iran in January 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile to widespread celebrations. Millions of Iranians greeted him upon his arrival in Tehran on February 1, 1979. Khomeini quickly emerged as the central figure in shaping the country's future, leading the movement to establish an Islamic government. The Shah's monarchy was officially abolished, and an interim government led by Mehdi Bazargan was formed to oversee the transition. However, tensions soon emerged between secular and religious factions as different groups vied for influence over Iran's new political structure. Khomeini's vision of a theocratic government based on Islamic principles gained widespread support among his followers, especially among religious scholars and clerics. In March 1979, a nationwide referendum was held, and the Iranian people overwhelmingly voted in favor of establishing an Islamic Republic. This new political system combined elements of theocracy and democracy. Khomeini became the supreme leader, a position granting him ultimate authority over religious and political matters. The new constitution, approved in December 1979, outlined the framework for the Islamic Republic. It included a president elected by universal suffrage, alongside a parliament and a council of clerics to ensure laws adhered to Islamic principles. While the constitution granted certain rights, these were often qualified with the stipulation that they must conform to Islamic criteria. The establishment of the Islamic Republic marked a significant shift in Iran's history. Khomeini's leadership and ideology set the tone for the new government, laying the foundation for a theocratic system that would continue to evolve in the decades to come. As supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini implemented policies that reflected his vision for an Islamic theocracy. His leadership emphasized strict adherence to Islamic law, and many aspects of daily life in Iran were regulated to align with these principles. Dress codes, particularly for women, were enforced, requiring them to wear the hijab in public. Music, entertainment, and cultural activities deemed un-Islamic were heavily restricted. Khomeini's policies promoted the role of religious clerics in governance, ensuring that Islamic values were at the center of political and social life. Education reforms focused on instilling Islamic ideology in schools and universities. The government also prioritized the nationalization of industries and resources to reduce foreign influence and promote economic independence. While Khomeini's leadership garnered significant support from religious groups, it also faced criticism for its authoritarian nature and human rights violations. Religious minorities such as the Baha'is faced persecution, and ethnic groups like the Kurds and Balochs experienced discrimination. Additionally, the strict implementation of Islamic law restricted personal freedoms, particularly for women. Despite these challenges, Khomeini's leadership was marked by his personal simplicity and incorruptibility. He lived modestly and avoided the corruption that plagued many other revolutionary leaders. His leadership style and policies left a lasting impact on Iran's political and social structures, defining the character of the Islamic Republic. The Iran-Iraq War began on September 22, 1980, when Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, invaded Iran. Hussein believed that Iran's post-revolutionary instability would make it an easy target, particularly in the oil-rich Khuzestan province. However, his assumption proved wrong, as Iran mounted a strong resistance. Initially, Iraq made territorial gains, but by 1982, Iran had regained its lost territory and launched counteroffensives into Iraq. The war became a prolonged conflict, lasting nearly 8 years and resulting in immense loss of life. An estimated 500,000 people were killed, and millions more were injured or displaced. The war was marked by the use of chemical weapons by Iraq, causing international condemnation. The conflict significantly strained Iran's economy, as resources were diverted to military efforts. Foreign trade and industrial growth suffered, and the country experienced shortages of essential goods. Despite this, Khomeini's leadership rallied national unity, with many Iranians viewing the war as a defense of their nation and Islamic values. Internationally, the war highlighted the complexities of global politics. Western nations, particularly the United States, provided covert support to Iraq, while also engaging in the Iran-Contra affair by secretly selling arms to Iran. This dual strategy reflected the geopolitical tensions of the Cold War era. The war finally ended in August 1988, with neither side achieving significant territorial gains. The conflict left lasting scars on both nations, particularly Iran, which faced the challenge of rebuilding its economy and infrastructure. Ayatollah Khomeini's leadership left a profound and lasting legacy on Iran and the broader Middle East. As the architect of the Islamic Republic, he transformed Iran into a theocratic state where religious principles govern political and social life. His concept of Vilayat Faqih, or the rule of the Islamic jurist, became the foundation of Iran's political system and continues to influence its governance today. Domestically, Khomeini's leadership brought both unity and division. While many Iranians supported his vision of an Islamic government, others criticized the loss of personal freedoms and the repression of minority groups. His policies, particularly those targeting women's rights and cultural expression, sparked ongoing debates about the balance between tradition and modernity in Iran. On the global stage, Khomeini reshaped the Middle East's political landscape. His opposition to Western influence and support for Islamic movements inspired other groups across the region. However, his policies also deepened Iran's isolation, leading to strained relations with many nations, particularly the United States. Khomeini's impact continues to shape Iran's political, social, and religious identity. His leadership remains a source of both admiration and controversy, reflecting the complexity of his role in modern history. What are your thoughts on Ayatollah Khomeini's legacy? Do you think his leadership helped or hindered Iran's progress? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insightful content. Thank you very much for watching.